What would you do if saving a life meant breaking the most sacred law in the galaxy? In the vast expanse of the Andromeda Sector, where ancient dragon-like beings rule entire star systems with wisdom spanning millennia, humans are barely tolerated visitors. We're the young species, the reckless ones, the beings who touch first and think later. The Draconic Council has exactly one rule for human interactions: never touch a dragon youngling. Not accidentally. Not to help, not even to save their life. The punishment? Immediate execution. No trial, no appeal, no exceptions in 10,000 years of galactic law. But Marcus Chun never was good at following rules, especially when a dying dragon baby lay bleeding in the rubble of a terrorist attack, crying for help in a language only humans seemed able to understand. This is the story of the human who broke the ultimate taboo and changed the fate of two species forever. Marcus Chun had always been told he had bad timing. Standing in the smoking ruins of Sector 7's diplomatic quarter, watching emergency responders pull bodies from collapsed buildings while a dragon youngling bled to death 3 meters away from him, he figured his timing had finally hit rock bottom. The terrorist attack on Nexus Station had happened 47 minutes ago. The death toll was climbing past 200. And here was Marcus, a simple cargo hauler from Earth, staring at something that could get him executed just for looking at it wrong. The dragon baby couldn't have been more than a few months old by their standards, which meant it was roughly the size of a large Earth horse, but with translucent silver scales that caught the emergency lighting like scattered diamonds. Its breathing was shallow, labored. Purple blood. Dragon blood was always purple. Everyone knew that, pooled beneath its small body where debris had crushed its left wing. Step away from the youngling, human. The voice belonged to Commander Veltar, the Draconic security chief. His massive form cast a shadow that could eclipse small moons. Adult dragons were impressive in the way that natural disasters were impressive. You appreciated them from a very safe distance. Marcus raised his hand slowly, the universal gesture of non-aggression. I wasn't going to touch it, Commander. I was just observing. Veltar's golden eyes narrowed to slits. Yes, that is what your species calls it when you prepare to interfere where you are not wanted. The accusation stung because it was probably accurate. Marcus had a reputation for sticking his nose where it didn't belong. It's how he'd ended up hauling freight in the outer systems instead of living comfortably on Earth. Too many questions asked, too many rules bent, too many authority figures who decided Marcus Chun was more trouble than he was worth. But the dragon youngling made a sound then, a keening cry that seemed to bypass his ears and go straight to something deeper in his chest. It sounded like a child calling for its mother. It sounded like pain given voice. It's dying, Marcus said. That is not your concern, human. Someone should, no one should. Veltar moved between Marcus and the youngling with the fluid grace that only dragons possessed. The healer caste is en route. They will determine if intervention is possible according to our laws and customs. Marcus glanced around the disaster zone. Emergency crews were working frantically, but their attention was focused on the buildings that had taken the worst damage. The dragon youngling was in a cleared area, visible but somehow overlooked, like it existed in a bubble of space that everyone had tacitly agreed to ignore. How long until the healer caste arrives? That information is not for human consumption. The youngling cried again, weaker this time. Its silver scales were losing their luster, fading to the dull gray that Marcus had heard meant impending death in dragons. He'd never seen it himself. Humans weren't usually present when dragons died. They kept their mortality very private. Commander, I've worked emergency response before joining the freight service. On Earth, during the Australian seismic crisis. I know field medicine. Veltar's laugh was like grinding stone. Human medicine. On a dragon youngling. Are you attempting humor, or is this simple ignorance? I'm saying maybe I could help. You are saying you wish to violate the most fundamental law governing human-dragon relations. The Codex of Separation exists for good reason. Human. Your species has a history of contaminating that which it touches. The words were delivered without heat, which somehow made them worse. Veltar wasn't being cruel. He was stating what he saw as biological fact. Marcus had grown up hearing about the Codex of Separation. Every human child learned it in school. Usually around the same time, they learned not to touch electrical outlets or run with scissors. The dragons were an ancient species, masters of biotechnology and energy manipulation that bordered on magic. Humans were newcomers to the galactic community barely 300 years since first contact. The Codex established clear boundaries. Humans could trade, could visit designated areas of dragon space, could even work alongside dragons in limited circumstances. But they could never, under any circumstances, make physical contact with a dragon youngling. The official reason was biological contamination. Human bacteria and viruses that were harmless to adult dragons could be devastating to their young. The unofficial reason, whispered in bars and cargo holds across human space, was that the dragons simply didn't trust humans not to corrupt their children somehow. Humans were chaotic, unpredictable. They touched things they shouldn't and broke things they didn't understand. Looking at the dying youngling, Marcus had to admit the dragons might have a point. The creature's breathing had become irregular. Its eyes, large and liquid silver like pools of mercury, kept rolling back. Marcus didn't need xenobiology training to recognize the signs of shock and blood loss. The healer cast, he said. How long? Veltar was quiet for a moment. Then, 23 minutes. Too long. Marcus could see it in the commander's posture, in the way his tail lashed against the debris-strewn ground. Even Veltar knew it was too long. What if someone could stabilize it until they arrive? Marcus asked carefully. Hypothetically speaking. Hypothetically, such intervention would require the offender's immediate execution, followed by a formal declaration of war against humanity. That seems extreme. The Codex allows for no exceptions, human. Not in 10,000 years of our law. Marcus studied the dragon commander's face. Veltar was old, even by dragon standards. His scales had the deep bronze patina that came with centuries of life. He'd probably been present when the Codex was first established. But there was something in his expression now, a tightness around his eyes that spoke of internal conflict. You want to save it too, Marcus realized. What I want is irrelevant. The law is absolute. The law is killing that baby. The law maintains the peace between our species. One life, even a youngling's life, is not worth the millions that would die in renewed conflict. Renewed conflict. Marcus had read about the Dragon Wars in school, but they felt like ancient history. 2 centuries of intermittent fighting between humans and dragons before the Codex established détente. Terrible casualties on both sides, entire worlds reduced to radioactive slag, and no clear winner by the end of it. The youngling's cry was barely audible now. Marcus found himself taking a step forward before he consciously decided to move. Veltar's hand dropped to his sidearm, a plasma weapon that could reduce a human to component atoms in less than a second. Do not make me execute you, Marcus Chun. The use of his name was startling. Marcus hadn't realized the commander even knew who he was. You looked at my file. I look up every human who enters this sector. You have an interesting history, cargo hauler. 17 citations for violation of transport regulations, 12 arrests for interfering with law enforcement operations, and 1 commendation for heroic action during a natural disaster. Veltar's golden eyes never left Marcus's face. You saved 47 lives during the Australian seismic crisis. You were also court-martialed for disobeying direct orders from your commanding officer. Those orders would have gotten people killed. Yes, according to the records, you were correct. But you violated your chain of command to save strangers. What's your point, Commander? My point is that I recognize the expression currently on your face. It is the same expression worn by every human I have ever had to kill for violating the Codex. The plasma weapon was now aimed directly at Marcus's chest. But Veltar hadn't activated it yet. The charging whine that preceded dragon plasma weapons was notably absent. How many? Marcus asked. How many what? How many humans have you killed for touching dragon younglings? The silence stretched between them. Around the disaster site, rescue operations continued. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. But in this small, cleared space, time seemed suspended. 17, Veltar finally said. In my 437 years of service, I have executed 17 humans for violation of the Codex. What were they trying to do? Most were researchers who believed they could circumvent biological contamination protocols. 3 were medical personnel who attempted to provide aid during emergencies. 1 was a child who did not understand the consequences of her actions. A child. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. How old? 7, by your reckoning. And you killed her. I followed the law. But there was no satisfaction in Veltar's voice. The law that prevents war between our species. Marcus looked at the dying youngling. Its silver scales had gone completely gray now. The sound of its breathing was like wind through broken glass. What if there was another way? There is no other way. The Codex, forget the Codex for a second. Marcus kept his hands raised, but his voice grew urgent. What if we could save that youngling without violating the biological contamination protocols? What if there was a way to help it that didn't require direct contact? Veltar's weapon didn't waver. Elaborate. Emergency stasis field. Your people use them for medical transport, right? If someone could generate a localized stasis field around the youngling, it would halt the progression of its injuries without requiring physical contact. Stasis field generators are strictly controlled technology. Humans are not authorized to operate them. But you are. The words hung in the air between them. Marcus watched understanding dawn in the Dragon Commander's golden eyes. You are asking me to violate protocol. I'm asking you to save a life. And if the healer caste determines that intervention was inappropriate, if they rule that the youngling's injuries are beyond treatment, that we have merely prolonged its suffering, then at least we tried. Veltar was quiet for a long moment. His weapon remained trained on Marcus, but his attention kept drifting to the youngling. The creature had stopped moving entirely now. Only the faintest rise and fall of its chest indicated it was still alive. There would be consequences for both of us, the commander finally said. If this action is discovered, if it is deemed a violation of the Codex, your execution would be swift. Mine would be considerably less pleasant. What do dragons do to dragons who violate the Codex? Scale removal. Exile. A long, slow death on a barren world where the light of no star can warm us. Marcus swallowed hard. He hadn't known dragons could be punished so severely by their own kind. It made Veltar's position even more impossible. The youngling made no sound at all now. Commander, Marcus said quietly, I think we're out of time for debate. Veltar's hand moved to a device on his belt, a small cylindrical object that hummed with barely contained energy. A portable stasi générateur. Standard equipment for Dragon security forces. If I do this, he said, you will leave immediately. You will not speak of what transpired here. And you will never return to this sector. Agreed. And if questioned by the healer caste, you will state that you observed the incident from a distance, but took no action. What if they ask about the stasis field? I will inform them that I made the decision unilaterally, based on emergency protocols that allow for field commander discretion in extraordinary circumstances. Are there such protocols? No, Veltar said grimly. But it will take the judicial caste several days to research that fact. The Dragon Commander activated the stasis generator. A shimmering field of silver light enveloped the youngling, and its labored breathing immediately steadied. The gray color began to leach from its scales as cellular damage was frozen at the molecular level. Fascinating, Veltar murmured. I have never used emergency stasis on a youngling before. The energy readings are quite different from adult physiology. Marcus stared at the stabilized creature. It looked peaceful now, like it was sleeping rather than dying. Will it work? The stasis field will maintain the youngling's current condition for approximately 6 hours. Whether the healer caste can repair the damage to its wing and internal organs. Veltar shrugged. That is beyond my expertise. But it has a chance now. Yes, it has a chance. The sound of approaching aircraft interrupted their conversation. 2 sleek Dragon medical shuttles were descending toward their position, their hull plating gleaming with the distinctive green markings of the healer caste. "That is my cue to leave," Marcus said. "Indeed. Follow the main evacuation route to the human quarter. Remain there until transport off station can be arranged." Marcus turned to go, then stopped. "Commander? The 17 humans you executed for violating the Codex. Do you ever wonder if some of them might have been right to try?" Veltar was quiet for so long that Marcus thought he wouldn't answer. Then, just as the medical shuttles touched down, "I wonder about it every day, Marcus-chun. But wondering and knowing are different things entirely." Marcus nodded and walked away. He didn't look back at the youngling in its stasis field, didn't watch the healer caste begin their work. But he couldn't shake the image of those silver eyes or the sound of its cry for help. As he made his way through the debris-strewn streets toward the human quarter, Marcus reflected on what had just happened. He'd followed orders for once, stayed within the boundaries, let someone else take the risk. It should have felt like the mature, responsible thing to do. Instead, it felt like the first time in his life that walking away might have been the real mistake. Behind him, the silver glow of the stasis field flickered like a distant star. 3 days later, Marcus was loading cargo containers onto his freighter when the message came through. The communication was encrypted, routed through 17 different relay stations, and marked with security protocols that made his ship's computer wheeze with effort to decode it. The message was short. Asterisk youngling survived. Complications arose. Meet me at the usual place. The asterisk Marcus stared at the words until they blurred together. There was no usual place between him and Commander Veltar. They'd met exactly once, for maybe 20 minutes during a crisis situation. But somehow Marcus knew exactly where the dragon met. The Nebula Drift was a bar. Calling it a cantina would have been generous, located in the neutral zone between human and dragon space. It catered to the kind of beings who didn't fit comfortably in either civilization. Smugglers, information brokers, scientists conducting questionable research, and the occasional diplomat who needed to have conversations that officially never happened. Marcus had been there twice before, both times to fence salvage of questionable legality. The establishment was run by a Cetian named Clock who asked no questions, kept no records, and served alcohol strong enough to strip paint from hull plating. It took Marcus 18 hours to reach the drift, flying through hyperspace with a growing sense that his life was about to become significantly more complicated. The bar occupied the entire interior of a converted asteroid mining station, hollow chambers carved from solid rock and connected by a maze of tunnels that had been designed to confuse customs agents and bounty hunters. Veltar was waiting in one of the private booths, a space designed for beings who valued privacy above comfort. The Dragon Commander looked different in civilian clothes, less imposing somehow, though no less dangerous. Dragons never lost their predatory grace, even when trying to blend in. "You came," Veltar said as Marcus slid into the booth. "You said there were complications." "Several. Would you care for a drink?" "I'd care for information." Veltar gestured to Clock, who approached with the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned not to get involved in his customer's business. "2 glasses of Terran whiskey," the Dragon Commander ordered. "The real variety, not the synthetic." Clock nodded and retreated. Marcus waited until they were alone again before speaking. "The youngling survived. That's good news, right?" "Yes and no." Veltar's golden eyes were troubled. The healer caste was able to repair the damage to its wing and internal organs. Physically, the youngling has made a complete recovery. Then what's the problem? The problem is that the youngling remembers. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the asteroid's climate control. Remembers what? Dragons are not like humans, Marcus-chun. Our cognitive development follows different patterns. What you call memory, we call life song. From a moment of hatching, everything a dragon experiences becomes part of an integrated neural pattern that grows more complex with age. Clock returned with their drinks. Marcus knocked his back immediately, welcoming the burn. Veltar sipped his more carefully, as if considering each word before speaking. The youngling's life song now contains a memory that should not exist, the dragon continued. A human voice calling to it in distress. the sound of human emotions responding to its pain. I didn't touch it. No, but you witnessed its suffering. You responded to its cries with what dragons call heart fire, the emotional resonance that passes between parent and child or between bonded individuals. Marcus set down his empty glass harder than necessary. I don't understand what that means. It means the youngling has imprinted on you, Marcus Chun. It recognizes your emotional signature as something like family. The healer cast attempted to remove or alter these memories, but dragon neural patterns cannot be edited without causing permanent damage. The implications hit Marcus like a cargo container to the skull. So, the youngling remembers a human who cared about its well-being during a traumatic event. That's a violation of the Codex, isn't it? Arguably, yes. Though the legal precedent is unclear, as this situation has never occurred before. What happens now? Veltar was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of someone delivering bad news he'd been rehearsing. The youngling's name is Zeth Kaler, Little Star in your language. It is the child of High Counselor Mordun, one of the most influential figures in the Draconic Council. Mordun has petitioned the judicial caste for a formal review of the incident. A trial? Of sorts. The judicial caste will determine whether our actions constituted a violation of the Codex, and, if so, what penalties should be applied. Marcus signaled Clock for another drink. What's the worst-case scenario? Execution for you. Exile for me. A formal censure against humanity that could result in the termination of all trade agreements between our species. And the best case, the judicial caste rules that emergency protocols supersede Codex restrictions. Our actions are deemed lawful, and life continues as normal. What do you think the chances are of the best-case scenario? Veltar's silence was answer enough. Marcus stared into his second glass of whiskey, watching the amber liquid swirl. There's something else, isn't there? Something you haven't told me. The youngling has been asking for you. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. What? Dragons do not typically form emotional attachments to other species. It is considered a developmental abnormality, something that usually corrects itself as the youngling matures. But Zeth Kaler has been distressed since recovering consciousness. It cries for the human who sang to its pain. I didn't sing to anything. Not with your voice, but your emotional response to its suffering created a harmonic resonance in its life song. To a dragon youngling, that resonance is indistinguishable from the comfort songs that parents use to soothe their children. Marcus downed his second drink and immediately regretted it. The alcohol was hitting his empty stomach like acid. This is insane. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes. I didn't even touch the thing. Nevertheless, Zeth Kaler has bonded with you, and that bond is causing complications within the Draconic Council. What kind of complications? Veltar leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried the weight of avalanches. Some members of the council believe that this bonding proves human contamination of dragon younglings is possible even without physical contact. They argue that the Codex is insufficient to protect our species from human influence. Meaning they want to sever all relations with humanity entirely. Permanent quarantine of human space, enforced by military blockade if necessary. The full scope of the disaster was starting to become clear. Marcus had spent 10 minutes trying to help an injured creature, and now 2 entire species might go to war because of it. There has to be another way, he said. High Counselor Mordun believes there might be, but it would require your cooperation. What kind of cooperation? Veltar reached into his jacket and withdrew a small device, a data pad with the elaborate security seals that marked official dragon documentation. Mordun has requested a formal meeting with you. A cultural exchange, officially. The opportunity for the Draconic Council to study human emotional responses and determine whether they represent a genuine threat to dragon development. Marcus took the datapad. The text was in 3 languages, Draconic, Standard Galactic, and English. A formal invitation to visit the dragon homeworld of Pyrieth under diplomatic immunity for a period of cultural observation not to exceed 30 standard days. This is a trap, Marcus said. Almost certainly. They want to study me like a lab rat. That would be my assessment. And if I refuse, then the judicial cast will proceed with its review based solely on existing evidence and legal precedent. Given that we've violated established protocols, regardless of our intentions, the outcome would likely favor those council members who view humans as a contaminating influence. Marcus read through the invitation again, noting the careful language and elaborate legal protections. Someone had spent considerable effort crafting this document. What about Zeth Kaler? What happens to the youngling if this goes badly? Mordun's child will survive regardless. The question is whether it will be allowed to develop naturally, or whether the council will order more intensive therapeutic intervention to remove the human influence from its life song. You mean they'd lobotomize it? I mean they would edit its neural patterns to remove any trace of human contact. The procedure is usually successful, though it often results in significant personality changes. Marcus thought about the youngling's silver eyes, the way it had cried for help in a language that seemed to bypass his conscious mind and speak directly to something deeper. The idea of erasing that connection, that brief moment of interspecies understanding, felt like vandalism of the worst kind. If I agree to this cultural exchange, what exactly would be expected of me? You would live among dragons for 30 days. Your emotional responses, social behaviors, and cognitive patterns would be observed and documented. You would interact with Zeth Kaler under controlled conditions, allowing the council to study the nature of the bond that has formed between you. And then, the council would use that information to make a final determination about human-dragon relations going forward. Marcus set the datapad down and rubbed his temples. A headache was building behind his eyes, the kind that came from too much alcohol and too many impossible decisions. What's your recommendation, Commander? My recommendation is that you refuse. Return to human space, change your identity if necessary, and disappear into the outer rim territories where the dragons cannot easily find you. That's not really an option, is it? No. Mordun has significant resources at his disposal. If he decides you represent a threat to his child's well-being, he will find you eventually. And my cooperation might buy some goodwill. It might. Or it might simply make you a more convenient target. Marcus picked up the datapad again. The invitation was signed with Mordun's personal seal, a complex glyph that supposedly carried the weight of sacred honor among dragons. Breaking faith with such a document would be considered a grave insult to dragon culture. How long do I have to decide? Mordun expects your answer within 72 hours. If you accept, transportation will be provided to Pyrieth immediately. And if I refuse, then I suggest you make peace with whatever gods your species recognizes. Marcus laughed, a sound with no humor in it. You know what's funny? I spent my whole career getting in trouble for sticking my nose where it didn't belong. And now, the one time I actually followed orders and walked away, it might start an interstellar war. The universe has a peculiar sense of irony, Veltar agreed. They sat in silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Around them, the nebula drift continued its usual business of facilitating conversations that officially never happened. Somewhere in the distance, a Cetian merchant was arguing with a human smuggler about shipping rates. A group of Altarian diplomats shared drinks and gossip about recent political developments in their sector. Normal interactions between species who had learned to coexist despite their differences. The kind of routine commerce and diplomacy that might become impossible if the Draconic Council decided humans were too dangerous to tolerate. Can I ask you something personal, Commander? You may ask. I may not answer. Why are you helping me? You've already risked your career once. Why get involved any further? Veltar considered the question while finishing his whiskey. Have you ever had children, Marcus Chun? No, I have. 3 younglings, all grown now, and serving in various capacities within Dragon Society. And I remember what it was like to watch them suffer, to feel helpless in the face of their pain. The Dragon Commander's golden eyes grew distant. When I saw Zethkiller dying in the wreckage, when I heard its cries for aid, I experienced something I had not felt in many years. the desire to act based on compassion rather than protocol. But you didn't act. I mean, not at first. No, I followed the law, as I've been trained to do for 4 centuries. But you looked at a suffering creature, and your first instinct was to help, regardless of consequences. That impulse frightens many in the council, but it also represents something valuable that dragons lost long ago. What's that? The ability to make moral decisions based on immediate empathy rather than historical precedent. Marcus mulled over the dragon's words. So you think I should accept More Dunn's invitation? I think you should make the decision that allows you to sleep at night, knowing you did everything possible to protect both your species and mine. That's not really an answer. No, Veltar agreed. But it is the only advice I can offer. Marcus stood up, pocketing the datapad. I need some time to think. Time is a luxury we may not have much of. I know, but this decision is going to affect more lives than just mine. I owe it to everyone involved to think it through properly. Veltar nodded. If you decide to accept More Dunn's invitation, contact me through the same channels you used to find me here. If you decide to refuse, well, it has been an honor knowing you, Marcus Chun. They shook hands, a human custom that Veltar had apparently learned somewhere in his long career. The dragon's grip was surprisingly gentle for a being capable of crushing steel. As Marcus made his way through the asteroid's winding corridors back to his ship, he found himself thinking about the youngling's silver eyes and the way its cries had seemed to reach something deep in his chest. He thought about Veltar's 17 executions, about 7-year-old human children who died for not understanding the consequences of compassion. Most of all, he thought about Zeth Kaler, somewhere on the dragon homeworld, asking for a human who had sung to its pain. By the time Marcus reached his freighter, his decision was made. The journey to Pyrieth took 12 days, even through hyperspace. Marcus spent most of that time reading everything he could find about dragon culture, biology, and history. The transport ship provided by the Draconic Council was unlike anything he'd experienced. More like a flying palace than a spacecraft, with living walls that pulsed gently and corridors that seemed to adjust their dimensions based on the occupant's size and comfort preferences. His escort was a dragon named Silandra, younger than Veltar, but carrying herself with the kind of authority that suggested high social standing. She had scales the color of deep ocean water and eyes like chips of Arctic ice. Unlike Veltar, who had learned to interact with humans through decades of security work, Silandra treated Marcus with the polite distance one might show an interesting, but potentially dangerous animal. Tell me about the youngling. Marcus said on the 3rd day of their journey. They were sharing a meal in the ship's central dining area. Or at least, Marcus was eating while Silandra absorbed nutrients through specialized scales that could process organic matter directly from the ship's biosystems. Zeth Kaler is healthy, she replied without looking at him. The healer cast reports full recovery from its physical injuries. That's not what I meant. Then, perhaps you should be more specific in your queries, human. Marcus had learned that dragons were often aggressively literal when they wanted to avoid a topic. How is Zeth Kaler coping emotionally with the trauma of the attack? Is it exhibiting any behavioral changes related to the bonding incident? Silandra's ice-blue eyes finally focused on him. You speak of bonding as if it were a simple matter of cause and effect. Isn't it? Dragon younglings do not form emotional attachments randomly. The process requires specific neurochemical conditions, usually triggered by prolonged exposure to parental figures or carefully selected mentors. What occurred between you and Zeth Kaler should have been impossible. But it happened anyway. Yes, which raises questions that the Council finds disturbing. Marcus pushed his food around his plate, having lost his appetite. What kind of questions? Questions about the fundamental nature of consciousness, empathy, and species development. Dragons have always prided ourselves on our emotional stability, our resistance to external influence. The suggestion that a human could accidentally trigger bonding responses in our younglings challenges basic assumptions about our biology. Maybe the assumptions are wrong. Silandra's laugh was like wind chimes made of ice. Spoken like a human. always ready to overturn millennia of established knowledge based on a single anomalous event. Veltar said dragons lost something valuable when you became so focused on protocol and precedent. Commander Veltar has spent too much time among humans. It has affected his judgment. Or maybe it's given him perspective. Perhaps. Cylindra stood gracefully, her movements flowing like water. You should prepare yourself, human. Pyrieth is not like the neutral stations where our species typically interact. You will be among dragons who have never seen a human before, who know your kind only through historical records and diplomatic reports. Hostile records, I'm guessing. Accurate records. The Dragon Wars are not ancient history to my people. Many of the council members you will meet fought in those conflicts. They remember human aggression, human unpredictability, human disregard for established order. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with Cylandra's emotional temperature. And they're supposed to judge whether humans are safe to be around dragon younglings. Yes, that seems like a conflict of interest. It is exactly the challenge you face, Marcus Chun. You must convince beings who have every reason to distrust your species that human emotional responses represent opportunity rather than contamination. The next 9 days passed in similar conversations, with Cylindra alternately educating Marcus about dragon society and making subtle threats about what would happen if he failed to meet the council's expectations. By the time Pyrieth appeared on the view screen, Marcus felt like he was preparing for the most important exam of his life, one where failure meant not just his own death, but potentially war between species. Pyrieth was beautiful in the way that natural disasters were beautiful. The dragon homeworld was larger than Earth, with gravity that made Marcus feel like he was wearing weighted clothing. The atmosphere was thick with volcanic ash that created spectacular sunsets, but also made every breath taste of sulfur and iron. Cities were carved directly into mountainsides, their architecture following the natural contours of stone and crystal formations. The council complex was built inside an extinct volcano, its chambers and corridors following the ancient lava tubes that had once carried molten rock to the surface. Marcus's living quarters were comfortable, but clearly designed to contain rather than welcome. The walls were solid stone. The single window looked out onto a sheer cliff face, and the door locked from the outside. For your protection, Cylindra explained as she showed him to his room. Pyrieth can be dangerous for beings unaccustomed to our environment. And if I need to leave, simply activate the communication panel. An escort will be provided. A guard, she meant. Marcus was a guest, but he was also a prisoner. His first meeting with High Counselor Mordun took place the next morning in what dragons called a harmony chamber, a circular room designed to promote calm discussion through specific acoustic properties and carefully controlled lighting. Mordun was ancient even by dragon standards, his scales the deep gold color that came with extreme age. His eyes were like molten amber, and when he looked at Marcus, it felt like being examined under a microscope. You are smaller than I expected, Mordun said without preamble. Sorry to disappoint. I did not say I was disappointed. Merely observing. Dragons often assume that species which cause significant disruption must be physically imposing. Marcus took a seat in the chair that had been provided. Human-sized furniture in a room designed for beings 3 times his mass. I didn't mean to cause disruption. Intention is irrelevant. Outcome is what matters. Mordun settled himself with the fluid grace that all dragons possessed, even ancient ones. You have bonded with my child. Explain how this occurred. I honestly don't know. I heard it crying. I wanted to help, and I stayed nearby until Commander Veltar stabilized it with the stasis field. You heard Zeth Kaler crying. Describe this sound. Marcus struggled to find words for something that had bypassed language entirely. It sounded like pain, but more than that, it sounded like it was calling for someone to care about its pain. And you responded to this call. I guess I did. Why? The question seemed absurd. Because something was hurt and needed help. Why wouldn't I respond? Because it was not your species, not your responsibility, and helping it could result in your execution. Those seem like reasons to be careful, not reasons to ignore suffering. Mordun was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus with those amber eyes. Dragons do not form attachments easily. Our emotional bonds are typically limited to family members and carefully selected individuals who prove themselves over years of interaction. Yet, Zethkaler bonded with you in minutes. Maybe dragons are more like humans than you think. That possibility is precisely what concerns the Council. The conversation continued for over 2 hours, with Mordun asking detailed questions about Marcus's background, his emotional responses during the incident, and his understanding of dragon culture. It felt less like an interview and more like an interrogation conducted by someone who was very good at reading people. Finally, Mordun stood. You will meet with Zethkaler tomorrow. The encounter will be observed and recorded for analysis by the full council. What should I expect? I do not know. This situation has no precedent in our history. As Marcus was escorted back to his quarters, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just failed some kind of test. Mordun had given no indication of his conclusions, no hint about whether the council was likely to view human emotional responses as beneficial or threatening. That night, Marcus lay in his stone bed, listening to the sounds of Pyrieth outside his window. Dragon cities never truly slept. There was always the distant sound of wings, the harmonic frequencies that dragons use for long-distance communication, the deep thrumming of geothermal power systems that fed the mountain cities. Somewhere in this vast complex was a dragon youngling who remembered his voice, who had formed an impossible bond during the worst moments of its young life. Tomorrow, Marcus would meet Zethkaler face to face, with the future of human-dragon relations hanging in the balance. No pressure at all. The next morning brought Silandra with what she described as preparation instructions, but which sounded more like warnings. Marcus was not to make sudden movements around the youngling. He was not to attempt physical contact under any circumstances. He was to speak only when directly addressed and keep his responses brief and neutral. What you call the bonding incident has created an unstable psychological dynamic, she explained as they walked through corridors carved from volcanic glass. Zethkaler's emotional development has been disrupted. Our concern is that further exposure to human influence could cause permanent damage. What kind of damage? Dragons mature slowly, over decades. During the early years, a youngling's personality is fluid, shaped by interactions with family and mentors. If Zethkaler begins to prioritize human emotional patterns over dragon development stages, the result could be an adult dragon that is neither fully dragon nor truly human, a being caught between species without fully belonging to either. That sounds more like an opportunity than a tragedy. Silandra stopped walking and turned to face him. You would condemn a youngling to a life of isolation and confusion for the sake of your species' curiosity about interspecies bonding. The accusation hit harder than Marcus expected. I would want Zethkaler to have the chance to choose its own path, rather than having that choice made by others based on fear. Fear is not always irrational, human. Sometimes it is the wisdom of experience. They continued walking in silence after that, through corridors that grew gradually warmer as they approached the volcanic heart of the complex. The meeting chamber was smaller than Marcus had expected, more intimate. Crystal formations in the walls provided soft, natural lighting, and the floor was covered with what looked like living moss that responded to footsteps with gentle bioluminescence. Zethkaler was waiting in the center of the room. Marcus had last seen the youngling dying in rubble, gray with shock and blood loss. Now, it was healthy, alert, and absolutely magnificent. Its silver scales caught the crystal light like scattered stars, and its wings, fully healed from the damage caused by falling debris, were spread in what Marcus somehow recognized as a posture of nervous excitement. But it was the eyes that hit him hardest. Those liquid silver eyes that seemed to look straight into his soul and recognize something there. "Hello, Zethkaler," Marcus said softly. The youngling made a sound, not the cry of pain from their first encounter, but something musical and complex. A greeting, Marcus realized. A song of recognition and joy. Around the chamber, he could sense the presence of observers. Dragons hidden behind one-way crystal panels, recording every sound and movement. The weight of their attention was almost overwhelming. Zethkaler took a step toward him, then another. Its movements were graceful despite its youth, but there was something in its posture that seemed almost human-like. A tilt of the head that reminded Marcus of a curious child, a way of holding its wings that suggested barely contained enthusiasm. "It recognizes you," Cylindra murmured from her position near the entrance. "Its life song is resonating with your presence." "What does that mean?" "It means the bond has grown stronger, not weaker, since your first encounter." Zethkaler was close enough to touch now, if Marcus had been suicidal enough to try. Instead, he kept his hands carefully at his sides and spoke in the same gentle tone he might use with a frightened animal. "I'm glad you're okay, little one. You look much better than the last time I saw you." The youngling's response was immediate and shocking. It began to sing. The sound was unlike anything Marcus had ever heard. Complex harmonies that seemed to come from multiple sources within the creature's body, frequencies that resonated in his bones, and made his chest vibrate with sympathetic echoes. But underneath the alien beauty of the dragon's song, Marcus could hear something else. A melody. Simple, human, heartbreakingly familiar. It was Amazing Grace, the old earth hymn that Marcus's grandmother used to hum when she thought no one was listening. A song Marcus had sung to himself during the Australian seismic crisis when he was trapped in the ruins for 18 hours, waiting for rescue teams to reach him. He had never sung it aloud during the incident on Nexus Station, but somehow Zethkaler had absorbed the emotional resonance of that memory, the comfort song that lived deep in Marcus's subconscious, and was now giving it back to him in dragon harmonics. Impossible cylinder vi spirit. Around the chamber, Marcus could hear surprise sounds from the hidden observers. Whatever they had expected, it wasn't this. Zethkaler finished its song and looked at Marcus expectantly, its silver eyes bright with intelligence and affection, waiting for his response, waiting for him to sing back. Marcus looked around the chamber, knowing his next decision would be recorded and analyzed by the full Draconic Council. He could play it safe, remain neutral, avoid giving them any further evidence of human contamination of their youngling. Or he could honor the bond that had formed between them, regardless of the consequences. Marcus began to hum Amazing Grace in his own voice, the simple human melody that his grandmother had used to comfort him as a child, that he had used to comfort himself in dark places, that had somehow become part of the dragon youngling's life song. Zethkaler's joy was immediate and overwhelming. The youngling's scales brightened until they were like captured starlight, and it began to harmonize with Marcus's simple melody, creating something that was neither fully human nor fully dragon, but somehow belonged to both species. They sang together for several minutes, creating music that had never existed before in the history of either of their worlds. When they finished, the chamber was silent except for the soft sounds of recording equipment and the surprised breathing of hidden observers. Zethkaler approached Marcus even closer, stopping just out of arm's reach. It looked up at him with those liquid silver eyes and spoke its first word in Standard Galactic. "Friend," it said in a voice like wind chimes and distant thunder. Marcus felt tears on his cheeks and realized he was crying. The council session that followed Marcus's meeting with Zethkaler was unlike anything in dragon legal history. Instead of the usual formal chambers designed for ceremonial proceedings, the dragons had gathered in what they called a Circle of Truth, an ancient amphitheater carved into the living rock of Pyrietha's core, where decisions affecting the future of their species had been made for thousands of years. Marcus sat in the center of the circle, feeling very small and very human under the golden eyes of 37 dragon counselors. Each member of the council represented a different aspect of dragon society: the military caste, the healer caste, the scholar caste, the artisan caste, and others whose functions Marcus only partially understood. What he did understand was that every one of them was older, smarter, and more powerful than he could ever hope to be. High Counselor Mordun rose from his position at the head of the circle. The ancient dragon's voice carried easily through the amphitheater, each word precisely enunciated. We have gathered to address an unprecedented situation. A human has formed a bond with a dragon youngling under circumstances that may constitute a violation of the Codex of Separation. We must determine whether this bond represents contamination that threatens our species or evolution that might benefit both our peoples. Murmurs rippled through the assembled counselors. Marcus caught fragments of conversation in Draconic, a language that sounded like controlled avalanches and singing crystals. For what he could understand, the council was deeply divided. Counselor Thrallvan of the military caste spoke first. His scales were the dark red of old blood, scarred from battles fought during the Dragon Wars. The evidence is clear. This human has corrupted a youngling's development through emotional manipulation. The creature now exhibits behavior patterns that are neither human nor dragon, but some unnatural hybrid. Zethkaler learned to sing a human melody. Marcus interjected, earning sharp looks from several counselors. That's not corruption, it's cultural exchange. You are not given permission to speak, Thrallvan replied coldly. But I was given permission to be here, which implies you want my perspective on these events. Mordun raised a clawed hand for silence. The human may speak when directly addressed. We are here to gather information, not to conduct a trial. Counselor Erlin of the Scholar caste rose next. Her scales were the pale blue of winter sky, and her voice carried the cadence of someone accustomed to lecturing. The question before us is not whether bonding occurred, but what the long-term implications might be. Our research into human emotional patterns suggests a species prone to rapid attachment and equally rapid abandonment. If Zethkaler has bonded with this human, what happens when the human inevitably loses interest and moves on to other concerns? Marcus felt anger rising in his chest. You're talking about a child who was dying, who formed a connection with someone who cared about its suffering. You're treating that connection like it's a disease to be cured. Because it might very well be, Thrallvan snapped. Human emotional instability is well documented. Your species forms attachments based on temporary hormonal fluctuations rather than rational evaluation of compatibility. What you call love, we recognize as biological programming designed to promote short-term reproductive success. That's not, Marcus began. Is it not? Counselor Velkan of the Healer caste interrupted. She was younger than most of the other counselors, her green scales still bright with health. Human mating bonds rarely last more than a few decades. Human parent-child relationships often become strained or hostile as offspring mature. Even human friendships are frequently abandoned when circumstances change. By contrast, dragon bonds endure for centuries. Maybe that's the problem, Marcus said, knowing he was probably making things worse, but unable to stop himself. Maybe bonds that last centuries are too rigid to allow for growth and change. The amphitheater erupted in angry voices. Several counselors rose from their positions, their scales flaring with bioluminescent displays that Marcus had learned indicated strong emotion. Mordun had a call for order 3 times before the chamber settled. You dare suggest that dragon emotional stability is inferior to human chaos? Thrallvan's voice was like grinding stone. I'm suggesting that maybe there's value in both approaches. Stability and flexibility. Permanence and adaptability. Counselor Silandra, the same dragon who had escorted Marcus to Pyrieth, stood gracefully. The human raises an interesting point, though perhaps not the one he intended. Our observations of the bonding incident suggest that Zethkaler's attachment is not based on human emotional patterns, but on something deeper. She gestured toward the crystal screens that lined the amphitheater walls. Images appeared showing Marcus and Zethkaler during their meeting the previous day. Analysis of the youngling's life song during this encounter reveals harmonic structures that are unprecedented in our records. The melody it sang incorporated both dragon and human emotional frequencies, creating something entirely new. Precisely the contamination we seek to prevent, Thrallvan replied. or precisely the evolution we should embrace, Silandra countered. For the first time in our recorded history, a dragon has demonstrated the ability to incorporate external emotional patterns while maintaining its essential dragon nature. Rather than being diminished by the experience, Zethkalar appears to have expanded its capacity for emotional expression. Marcus watched the byplay between the counselors with growing fascination. The dragons weren't just debating policy. They were arguing about fundamental questions of identity and development that had implications far beyond his specific situation. Counselor Corthes of the Artisan caste spoke for the first time. His scales were the deep purple of twilight, and his voice carried undertones that seemed to harmonize with the natural acoustics of the chamber. I have reviewed the recordings of the youngling's song. As one who has studied dragon music for 3 centuries, I can state with confidence that Zethkalar's performance contained innovations that would normally take decades to develop. The incorporation of human melodic structures has accelerated its artistic growth in ways we do not fully understand. Accelerated growth could be dangerous, Counselor Velkin warned. Dragon development follows careful patterns for good reason. Rushing the process could result in psychological instability, or it could result in capabilities we never knew we possessed, Corthes replied. The question is whether we are brave enough to find out. The debate continued for hours, with different factions of the council presenting arguments for and against allowing the bond between Marcus and Zethkalar to continue. Marcus found himself increasingly impressed by the depth of dragon intellectual culture. These beings were grappling with questions about consciousness, development, and interspecies relationships with a sophistication that put most human philosophical traditions to shame. But he also sensed underlying currents of fear and prejudice that had roots stretching back to the Dragon Wars. Too many of the counselors saw humans as a chaotic force that threatened dragon stability simply by existing. As the formal debate wound down, more done rose again. We have heard arguments for both protection and exploration. Before we deliberate, there is one more voice that should be heard. The great doors of the amphitheater opened, and Zethkalar entered the chamber. The youngling moved with the natural grace that all dragons possessed, but Marcus could see the nervousness in its posture. Being in the same space as 37 adult dragons, including some of the most powerful figures in its species, would be intimidating for any youngling. Zethkalar approached the center of the circle and settled into a respectful posture near Marcus. Not close enough to touch, but near enough to offer mutual support. Zethkalar, Mordun said gently, "You have lived with both dragon and human influence for several days now. Tell the council how this has affected your development." The youngling looked around the chamber with those liquid silver eyes, taking in the assembled counselors. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that made the chamber walls resonate sympathetically. "I'm still dragon," Zethkalar said in careful standard galactic. "My scales grow as they should. My wings bear me through the air. My life song follows the patterns taught by my clutchmates and mentors." Several counselors nodded approvingly. "But I am also more than I was before," the youngling continued. "The human friend Marcus showed me that there are other ways to express pain, other ways to find comfort, other ways to connect with beings who are different from myself. And you believe this expansion is beneficial?" Mordun asked. "I believe it makes me a better dragon. The human song that lives in my life song now helps me understand dragons who suffer in ways I had not experienced. When I sing comfort songs to other younglings who are afraid or hurt, I can reach them in ways that pure dragon harmonics cannot." The chamber was completely silent. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Yesterday, Clutch Sister Morlin was injured in flight training. Her wing was damaged, and she cried the same way I cried when the building fell on me. But when I sang to her, using both dragon harmonies and human melodies, her pain song changed. She found comfort faster than she would have with traditional healing songs alone. "Konslur velkommen lind forward." You used human emotional patterns to heal another youngling? "I used all the tools available to me," Zethkalar replied. "Is that not what dragons are taught to do? To gather knowledge from all sources and apply it wisely. The youngling's logic was elegant and devastating. Marcus watched several counselors exchange glances, their expressions suggesting that Zethkaler had just made an argument they hadn't anticipated. Thralvin made one last attempt to maintain the hardline position. But what happens when the human leaves? When this bond is broken by distance and time? Zethkaler looked at Marcus with those silver eyes. The human friend Marcus will leave because humans travel where dragons cannot follow. But the songs he taught me will remain in my life song. The understanding he gave me will continue to grow. The bond we form will change, but it will not be broken. How can you be certain of that? Thralvin pressed. Because that is how all real bonds work. They become part of who you are, not just something you experience. The youngling's wisdom left the military caste counselor with no immediate reply. Mordun addressed Marcus directly. Human, you have heard our concerns and our hopes. You have seen how your presence has affected one of our most precious younglings. What is your assessment of this situation? Marcus had been dreading this question, knowing that his answer would likely determine not just his own fate, but the future of human-dragon relations. He looked around the amphitheater, meeting the golden eyes of beings who had lived for centuries, who had seen empires rise and fall, who carried the accumulated wisdom of one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations. I think you're all overthinking this, he said finally. The statement created another eruption of surprised voices. Mordun had to call for order again. Elaborate, the High Counselor said when the chamber had quieted. Dragons have spent thousands of years developing emotional control and social stability. Humans have spent thousands of years learning to adapt and improvise. Both approaches have value, but they're incomplete by themselves. Marcus stood up, knowing that remaining seated while addressing the council was probably a breach of protocol, but needing the physical movement to organize his thoughts. Zethkaler didn't become less dragon by bonding with me. It became a dragon with access to additional emotional tools. It's still following dragon development patterns, still learning from dragon mentors, still growing according to dragon biology. But now it can also draw on human experiences when those experiences are useful. And when human experiences are harmful. Velkommen asked. Then it has dragon wisdom to help it evaluate and integrate those experiences appropriately. The bond doesn't replace Zethkaler's dragon nature. It supplements it. Marcus looked directly at Zethkaler, seeing understanding and encouragement in the youngling's silver eyes. You're worried about contamination, about humans disrupting dragon development. But maybe the real risk is stagnation. Maybe after thousands of years of perfect emotional control, dragons have stopped growing in ways that could be beneficial. Are you suggesting that dragon civilization is somehow lacking? Thralvin's voice carried dangerous undertones. I'm suggesting that no civilization, no matter how advanced, has nothing left to learn. Humans are chaos, yes. We're unpredictable and emotional, and we make terrible decisions based on temporary feelings. But we're also creative and adaptable and capable of forming connections across species barriers that everyone else considers impossible. Marcus gestured towards Zethkaler. That youngling proved that dragon emotional development is more flexible than your records suggest. Maybe instead of seeing that as a problem to be solved, you could see it as an opportunity to be explored. The chamber fell silent again. Marcus sat down, suddenly, exhausted by the weight of everything he'd just said. Mordun rose slowly, his ancient scales catching the crystal light. The council will deliberate on what we have learned. Marcus Chun, you will return to your quarters while we reach our decision. Zethkaler, you will remain here to answer any additional questions the counselors might have. As Marcus was escorted from the chamber, he caught one last glimpse of Zethkaler, surrounded by the massive forms of the adult dragons. The youngling looked very small in that company, but also remarkably composed. Whatever the council decided, Zethkaler had spoken its truth with courage and wisdom. Now all Marcus could do was wait and hope that dragon wisdom would prove flexible enough to embrace change. The deliberations lasted 18 hours. Marcus was drinking synthetic coffee and trying to read a book about dragon geology when Silandra arrived at his quarters. Her ice blue scales were dim, which Marcus had learned indicated fatigue or stress. The council's deliberations had clearly taken their toll on everyone involved. "The decision has been reached," she said without preamble. Marcus set down his coffee cup with hands that weren't quite steady. "And you're to be brought before the full council for the announcement. But first, High Counselor Mordun wishes to speak with you privately." They walked through corridors that seemed different somehow, as if the very architecture of the mountain complex had shifted during the long hours of deliberation. The volcanic glass walls reflected their movements in fragmented patterns that made Marcus feel like he was walking through a kaleidoscope. Mordun was waiting in the same harmony chamber where Marcus had first met him. The ancient dragon looked even older than before, his golden scales dulled with exhaustion. But his amber eyes were bright with something that might have been satisfaction. "Sit," Mordun said. "We have much to discuss before the formal announcement." Marcus took his usual seat, the human-sized chair that made him feel like a child visiting an adult's office. "I take it the deliberations were eventful, the most contentious in recent memory. Several counselors threatened to resign their positions rather than accept the majority decision. Others suggested that those who opposed the decision should be removed from the council entirely." "That sounds ominous." "It sounds like democracy in action," Mordun replied dryly. "Even dragon democracy, which moves at a pace that would frustrate most humans." The High Counselor settled himself more comfortably, his massive form flowing into a relaxed position. "Tell me, Marcus Chun, what do you know about the origin of the Codex of Separation?" "The official version? It was established after the Dragon Wars to prevent future conflicts between our species. The official version is not entirely accurate. The Codex was established because both dragons and humans were terrified of what they had learned about themselves during the wars." Marcus leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "Dragons discovered that prolonged exposure to human emotional patterns could destabilize our carefully controlled psychological development. Humans discovered that extended contact with dragon mental disciplines could suppress their capacity for rapid adaptation and creative thinking." "You were changing each other." "Exactly. Both species were becoming something neither purely dragon nor purely human. The question that paralyzed our leaders for decades was whether this change represented evolution or devolution." Mordun's amber eyes grew distant. "The conservative factions in both species argued for complete separation. Better to remain pure than to risk contamination. The progressive factions suggested controlled integration, careful experimentation with hybrid development. Obviously, the conservatives won. The conservatives won because a third option emerged. A small group of extremists from both species attempted to create fully integrated hybrid communities. The results were instructive." Marcus waited for more details, but Mordun seemed lost in memory. "What happened to the hybrid communities?" "They thrived beyond all expectations. Dragon emotional stability combined with human adaptability created beings capable of remarkable achievements. They developed technologies that neither species had been able to create alone, established social structures that were both stable and flexible, and began to solve problems that had plagued both civilizations for millennia." "That sounds like a success story." "It was, which is precisely why both species destroyed them." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "They what?" "The hybrid communities represented an existential threat to both parent species. If integration produced beings superior to either dragons or humans, what was the ultimate fate of the original species? Would they become obsolete? Would they be absorbed into something that was neither dragon nor human, but something entirely new?" Mordun's voice carried the weight of ancient shame. "The Dragon Wars officially ended with the establishment of the Codex of Separation. Unofficially, they ended with the systematic destruction of every hybrid community that had formed during the conflict. Both species agreed that the risk of replacement was too great to tolerate." Marcus felt sick. "How many people died?" "Approximately 2 million beings. Men, women, children, and dragon younglings who had never known anything but integrated communities. They were eliminated to preserve the purity of their parent species. The Harmony Chamber felt suddenly cold. Marcus found himself shivering despite the volcanic heat that normally warmed the mountain complex. Why are you telling me this? Because the Council's decision today will either repeat that ancient mistake or learn from it. Mordun rose from his resting position and moved to one of the crystal walls. His reflection was distorted in the natural formations, making him look like a figure from a dream or nightmare. Zethkaler represents something that we thought we had eliminated from the galaxy, a being capable of bridging the gap between species without losing its essential nature. The question facing the Council was whether to preserve this development or prevent it from spreading. And their decision was influenced heavily by your own words during the deliberation. Your argument that both species could benefit from expanded capabilities without losing their core identities. It resonated with counselors who had been harboring similar thoughts for decades. Marcus felt a flutter of hope. Does that mean? It means the Council has authorized the first formal interspecies development program in galactic history. Zethkaler will be permitted to continue its bond with you, under carefully controlled circumstances, as part of a research initiative designed to study the long-term effects of human-dragon emotional integration. The relief was overwhelming. Marcus realized he'd been holding his breath without knowing it. However, Mordun continued. The program comes with significant restrictions and requirements, such as you will be required to relocate to Pyrieth permanently. Your interaction with Zethkaler will be monitored and documented in detail. You will submit to regular psychological evaluation to ensure that the bonding process is not adversely affecting your own human development. Marcus nodded. These seemed like reasonable precautions. Additionally, you will serve as the primary human contact for other younglings who may show interest in interspecies bonding. If this program succeeds, it will likely expand to include additional human-dragon pairs. How many humans will be involved? Initially, perhaps a dozen, carefully selected for psychological stability and cultural sensitivity. Eventually, Mordun's expression was unreadable. That would depend on the results of our research. The implications were staggering. Marcus was being asked to become the foundation of a new kind of relationship between species, one that could either produce remarkable advances in understanding and cooperation or recreate the disasters that had led to the destruction of the hybrid communities. What about the Codex of Separation? The Codex will be modified to allow for supervised interspecies contact under specific circumstances. The absolute prohibition on touching dragon younglings will be replaced with protocols for authorized interaction with trained human partners. And if I refuse? Mordun's amber eyes met his directly. Then, you'll be permitted to return to human space with the Council's thanks for your cooperation during this investigation. Zethkaler will receive therapeutic intervention to remove the bonding patterns from his life song, and the Codex will remain unchanged. Which means any future human who tries to help a dragon youngling will still be executed. Yes, Marcus understood the choice being offered. Personal freedom versus the possibility of fundamentally changing the relationship between two species. A comfortable life in human space versus the unknown challenges of building something that had never existed before. Can I see Zethkaler before I decide? Of course. The youngling was waiting in a garden courtyard that Marcus had never seen before, a space carved into the mountain where volcanic vents created natural hot springs and exotic plants grew in the mineral-rich soil. Zethkaler was resting beside one of the pools, its silver scales reflecting the steam that rose from the heated water. "Human friend Marcus," the youngling said as he approached. "The Council's decision has been explained to you." "Yes." "Have you been told what it means?" "I've been told that our bond may continue, but only if you agree to live among dragons for the rest of your life. I have also been told that you may choose to return to your own people instead." Marcus sat on a stone bench near the hot spring. The volcanic minerals in the water created colors he had no names for, and the steam carried scents that reminded him of earth forests after rain. "What do you think I should do?" Zethkaler considered the question with the serious attention that dragon younglings gave to important matters. I think you should choose the path that will make you grow into the human you are meant to become. That's very wise advice, but it doesn't really help me decide. Then perhaps I should tell you what I have learned during our time together. The youngling moved closer to the bench, settling in a position where they could see each other clearly. Before I met you, I believed that there was one correct way to be dragon. I followed the development patterns taught by my mentors, sang the traditional songs, and expected that my life song would follow the same progression as thousands of generations before me. And now I understand that there are many ways to be dragon, just as there are many ways to be human. The bond we share has not made me less dragon, but it has shown me possibilities I never knew existed. Zethkaler's silver eyes were bright with enthusiasm. Yesterday, I taught 3 other younglings the human comfort song you shared with me. Today, they taught it to their clutch mates. Within days, there may be dozens of young dragons singing human melodies as part of their life songs. The implications of that simple statement were enormous. Cultural exchange happening at the most fundamental level of dragon development, spreading through peer networks faster than any official program could control. Are the adult dragons concerned about this? Some are, but others are fascinated. Counselor Corthes has asked me to perform the hybrid songs for the artisan cast so they can study the harmonic structures. Counselor Silandra wants to understand how human emotional patterns integrate with dragon neural development. And you? How do you feel about being the subject of so much scientific attention? I feel honored to be part of something important and excited about what we might discover together. Marcus made his decision in that moment, watching a dragon youngling talk about the future with wonder and hope. The choice had never really been about his own comfort or safety. It had been about whether he was willing to help create something new and unprecedented despite the risks involved. Zethkaler, how would you feel about having a human friend who lives on Pyrieth permanently? The youngling's joy was immediate and overwhelming. Its scales brightened until they were like captured starlight, and it began to sing a melody that combined dragon harmonics with the human tune Marcus had shared with it. But this version was more complex, more sophisticated, incorporating musical innovations that neither species had developed on their own. Other voices joined the song. From various parts of the garden, Marcus could hear young dragons adding their own harmonies to Zethkaler's melody. Within minutes, the courtyard was filled with music that represented something entirely new in the galaxy. The sound of 2 species learning to create beauty together. As the song reached its crescendo, Marcus saw movement in the shadows around the courtyard. Adult dragons were emerging from hidden positions, drawn by the unprecedented music their younglings were creating. Among them, he recognized Mordun, Silandra, and even the stern military counselor Thralvan. None of them moved to stop the performance. Instead, they listened with expressions of wonder, fear, and possibility. When the song ended, the garden was silent except for the gentle sounds of the hot springs and the distant rumble of volcanic activity deep in the mountain's core. Then, Mordun stepped forward. Marcus Chun, the High Counselor, said formally, "On behalf of the Draconic Council, I invite you to become the first human resident of Pyrieth. Will you accept the responsibility of helping to guide this unprecedented experiment in interspecies development?" Marcus looked around the garden, taking in the faces of young dragons who were already changing in ways their ancestors had never imagined. He thought about the hybrid communities that had been destroyed centuries ago and about the possibility of building something better this time, something that enhanced both species rather than replacing either of them. "I accept," he said. Zethkaler's celebratory song was immediately joined by every youngling in the garden. But this time, several of the adult dragons added their voices as well, creating harmonies that bridged generations as well as species. 6 months later, Marcus received a message from Commander Veltar. The Dragon Security Chief had been assigned to lead a new interspecies relations division, tasked with identifying additional humans who might be suitable for the integration program. His first recommendation was a human xenobiologist named Dr. Sarah Chun, no relation to Marcus, who had spent her career studying interspecies communication patterns. The program was expanding carefully and deliberately with extensive safeguards and monitoring protocols. But it was expanding. Marcus's daily routine on Pyrieth had evolved into something he never could have imagined. Mornings were spent in language lessons, learning the complex grammatical structures that allowed dragons to express emotional concepts humans had no words for. Afternoons were dedicated to working with Zethkaler and other younglings, documenting the ways that human-dragon bonds developed and changed over time. Evenings were his favorite part of the day. That's when the younglings would gather in the garden courtyard to share songs they had created, melodies that blended human and dragon musical traditions in ways that created entirely new forms of artistic expression. Zethkaler had grown significantly in the months since their first meeting. Its wings were stronger now, capable of powered flight through Pyrieth's dense atmosphere. Its scales had developed the subtle color variations that indicated approaching adolescence. But most remarkably, its personality had begun to display characteristics that were recognizably both dragon and human. The youngling had retained the essential dragon traits of patience, wisdom, and emotional stability. But it had also developed a curiosity about other species, a willingness to question established traditions, and a creativity that manifested in constant musical and artistic innovation. "Do you ever regret your decision?" Cylindra asked one evening as they watched Zethkaler teach a group of newly hatched younglings how to sing a human lullaby. Marcus considered the question while listening to baby dragon's attempt to harmonize with a melody his grandmother had hummed to him decades ago on a world many light years away. "I regret that it took a terrorist attack and a dying child to bring our species together," he said finally. "I regret all the years we spent apart, afraid of what we might become if we allowed ourselves to really know each other. But not the bond itself, never the bond itself." As if hearing its name, Zethkaler looked up from its teaching duties and caught Marcus's eye. The youngling smiled, an expression that was neither fully human nor fully dragon, but somehow perfectly natural on its alien features. "Human friend Marcus," Zethkaler called out. "The new hatchlings want to know if you will teach them the sleeping song that helps young humans feel safe in the dark." Marcus walked over to join the group of baby dragons, each no larger than a house cat, but already displaying the intelligence and personality that would develop over the coming decades. As he settled among them and began to sing "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star" in the gentle cadence his grandmother had used, Marcus reflected on how his life had changed. He had been strictly told not to touch the dragon baby, but in carrying Zethkaler away from that prohibition, not physically but emotionally and culturally, he had helped create something that neither species could have achieved alone. The universe was vast and full of unknowns. But tonight, in a garden carved from volcanic stone on an alien world, human lullabies were helping dragon children sleep peacefully. That felt like progress worth celebrating. As the youngest hatchlings drifted off to sleep, their scales dimming to the soft gray that indicated dragon dreams, Zethkaler settled beside Marcus with the easy familiarity of old friends. "Tomorrow, 3 more humans arrive for the program," the young dragon said quietly. "Dr. Chun and her research team. Are you nervous about meeting them?" "Excited mostly. I wonder what new songs they will bring to our life songs." Marcus smiled, remembering his own first day on Pyrieth. The fear, the uncertainty, the overwhelming sense that he was part of something too big to comprehend. "I think you'll like Dr. Chun. She spent years studying how different species communicate with each other. She might be able to help us understand some of the harmonic patterns you've been developing." "And the others?" "A musician and a child psychologist. Both volunteers who wanted to be part of building something new." Zethkaler's scales brightened with anticipation. "Soon there will be enough humans on Pyrieth to form your own singing circle. You will be able to teach us group harmonies that require human vocal ranges." The future stretched before them, full of possibilities that neither species had been able to imagine alone. It wouldn't be easy, There would be setbacks, misunderstandings, and probably failures along the way. But for the first time in centuries, dragons and humans were learning to create beauty together instead of just avoiding conflict. Marcus had been told not to touch the dragon baby. Instead, he had learned that sometimes the most important connections happen without physical contact at all. Sometimes the most profound bonds are built from understanding, compassion, and the willingness to sing each other's songs. As the moons of Pyrieth rose over the volcanic peaks, casting silver light across the garden where interspecies friendships bloomed like exotic flowers, Marcus knew he had made the right choice. Some rules, it turned out, were meant to be broken, but only by those brave enough to handle the consequences and wise enough to build something better from the pieces.